Some content in this video was created using AI to reconstruct historical events. It is for educational and illustrative purposes and may not be fully accurate.
Imagine a poison so deadly that a single drop could kill, yet so mysterious that the greatest scientists of the 19th century believed it could never be detected in the human body. Now imagine a nobleman, desperate and in debt, who saw this poison as his perfect weapon. What happened next would shock Europe, topple an aristocrat, and forever change the way science serves justice.
Like and subscribe. Your support helps create more interesting content and is very important for the channel.
This is the story of Count Hippolyte Visart de Bocarmé, the murder of Gustave Fougnies, and the birth of modern forensic toxicology. Stay with me until the end, because the way this crime unraveled will surprise you. In 1850, Belgium was still a young nation, and the nobility clung fiercely to their fading prestige. Count Hippolyte Visart de Bocarmé, a man born into an old aristocratic line, carried the title but not the fortune to match. He had married Lady Fougnies, daughter of a wealthy grocer, hoping her inheritance would sustain their lavish lifestyle. But by mid-century, their money was gone. The couple was drowning in debt. Their last hope lay with Lady's brother, Gustave Fougnies, a frail man who had inherited the family fortune. The Bocarmés believed that when Gustave eventually died, they would inherit his wealth. But in November 1850, Gustave announced his plans to marry. That single decision shattered their expectations. Marriage meant heirs. Heirs meant the Bocarmés would be cut out. Desperate, they decided Gustave had to die. Count de Bocarmé was not only a nobleman, he was also a self-taught chemist. Behind the walls of Château de Bitremont, he had built a private laboratory under the guise of making perfumes. But in truth, he was studying something far darker. That summer, he purchased large amounts of tobacco leaves and a distillation apparatus. Secretly, he worked to extract nicotine, a colorless, oily liquid and one of the most potent poisons known to science. Unlike arsenic, which could already be detected in corpses thanks to the Marsh test, nicotine was believed to be impossible to trace in human tissue. Leading toxicologists, including Mathieu Orfila, the father of modern toxicology, had declared it undetectable. Convinced he had discovered the perfect crime, Bocarmé tested his extract on animals around the estate. Investigators later found evidence of dead cats and birds, silent victims of his experiments. He was preparing for murder with chilling precision. At the evening of November 20th, 1850, Gustave Fougnies arrived at the chateau for dinner. Servants noticed unusual behavior. The children were kept away, and the countess, who normally never cooked, insisted on preparing and serving the meal herself. Suspicion was already in the air. What happened next was anything but subtle. According to later testimony, as Gustave prepared to leave, the count lunged at him. There was a violent struggle. Servants heard cries for help and the crash of a body hitting the floor. Bocarmé forced the nicotine into his brother-in-law's mouth. This was no clean, invisible murder. The poison left burns and blisters on Gustave's lips, mouth, and throat. His body showed signs of bruising and cuts, and Bocarmé himself bore scratches and even a bite mark. The perfect crime had turned into a messy, undeniable act of violence. In panic, the Bocarmés tried to cover their tracks. They washed Gustave's body with vinegar, scraped poison-stained wood from the floor, and burned clothing. But their frantic cleanup was clumsy and incomplete. Servants, horrified and suspicious, reported the matter directly to the authorities. The case might have seemed straightforward, except for one problem. In 1850, there was no test to prove nicotine poisoning in a corpse. Without chemical evidence, the defense could argue that Gustave had died of natural causes. At the time, poison murders terrified the public. Arsenic was once the poisoner's favorite until science developed ways to detect it. Now the aristocratic count had gambled on nicotine, believing it to be beyond science's reach. And for a moment, it seemed he was right. The investigation stalled. Circumstantial evidence was strong, but legally it wasn't enough. To convict, authorities needed proof that nicotine was inside Gustave's body. They turned to a brilliant Belgian chemist named Jean-Servais Stas. Jean-Servais Stas was already a renowned scientist, respected for his precise work in chemistry. Presented with the Bocarmé case, he saw more than a murder, he saw a challenge to science itself. For 3 months, Stas worked tirelessly in his Brussels laboratory, using samples of Gustave's organs. He knew that traditional methods would destroy the delicate alkaloid, so he devised something new. Step by step, Stas carefully worked his way through the tissues. First, he treated them with alcohol and a weak acid, a process that removed the proteins while keeping the nicotine intact and dissolved. Next, he neutralized the solution, restoring the nicotine to its natural form, and then used ether to draw it out of the watery mixture. Finally, he gently evaporated the ether, leaving behind a small residue of pure, oily nicotine, proof that the poison could indeed be detected. The trial of Count and Countess de Bocarmé in Mons became a sensation across Europe. Crowds filled the courtroom. Newspapers covered every detail. Stas took the stand and explained his method step by step. His clear testimony transformed the case from suspicion to certainty. Gustave had been poisoned with nicotine. There was even high drama in the scientific world. Bocarmé's defense pointed to Orfila, the great toxicologist, who had declared such detection impossible. But Stas's evidence was undeniable. The jury chose hard proof over reputation. It was a triumph for modern science. The Countess managed to escape conviction. She claimed she was coerced by her violent husband, portraying herself as a terrified witness rather than an accomplice. The jury believed her. But Count Hippolyte Visart de Bocarmé was found guilty. On June 14, 1851, he was sentenced to death. A month later, he was executed by guillotine in Mons. His final request was almost ironic, that the blade be sharpened for a swift, clean cut. The Bocarmé affair was more than just a grisly aristocratic scandal. It changed the future of forensic science. Jean-Servais Stas's method, later refined into the Stas-Otto method, became the standard for detecting plant-based poisons for over a century. It marked a fundamental shift. Instead of trying to transform poisons into something detectable, scientists now focused on isolating the pure substance itself. This philosophy is the foundation of modern techniques like gas chromatography and mass spectrometry. The trial also cemented the role of expert witnesses in the courtroom. For the first time, a chemist's word carried the weight of life and death before a jury. Science and law were now inseparable partners in the pursuit of justice. And perhaps most importantly, the case shattered the myth of the undetectable poison. What Bocarmé thought was a perfect crime became the very experiment that proved otherwise. The Count of Bocarmé believed he had outsmarted the law. He placed his faith in science's limits, and it cost him his head. But in his failure, the world gained something far greater, a powerful new weapon for justice. The Bocarmé case reminds us that even the darkest crimes can become turning points for truth. From the Château de Bitremont to laboratories around the globe, its legacy endures in every toxicology test that speaks for the silent dead. The perfect crime no longer exists.